The story of Apache, a reputed female Vietnamese sniper during the Vietnam War, has become one of the Vietnam War's greatest historical mysteries. She's often cited in connection with the legendary U.S. Marine sniper Carlos Hathcock, who claimed to have encountered and ultimately eliminated her. Yet much debate surrounds whether she was a historical individual, a composite figure, or perhaps even a complete fiction. While there's widespread anecdotal evidence in Western sources, especially among American veterans, the lack of verifiable Vietnamese records has led some to question her existence. Hathcock alleged that Apache was a skilled Viet Cong sniper, known for her brutality, including the torture of captured Marines. According to his recollection, this female fighter earned the nickname Apache because of her penchant for mutilating American prisoners. Critics point out that first-hand documentation of Apache's existence remains elusive outside of oral testimony and veteran anecdotes. If she really had been a high-profile Viet Cong sniper, there might have been at least some formal records from the North Vietnamese. Historians have noted that the People's Army of Vietnam tended to keep fairly detailed records, including information about decorated snipers and specialized units. However, the Viet Cong, while fighting under the direction of North Vietnam, wasn't officially part of the People's Army of Vietnam. Further, the Viet Cong was composed of regular units, which may have had better record keeping, and guerrilla units, which almost certainly didn't. Skeptics argue that if she were as infamous as described, there should be at least some trace in Vietnamese archives. Further, they argue that if she had existed, she would have been lauded by the North Vietnamese for propaganda purposes. On the other hand, defenders of the historical Apache theory point to the nature of guerrilla warfare. The Viet Cong operated in covert cells, with fighters often using pseudonyms to hide their identities from both the enemy and even their allies, if operational security demanded it. Under such conditions, it's plausible that a female sniper could have operated without leaving an extensive paper trail. Moreover, the massive destruction and confusion that accompanied the Vietnam War might mean that some documentation, if it ever existed, was destroyed or lost. This argument suggests that the absence of evidence is not definitive proof of her non-existence. Also, according to the official narrative, she was a figure deeply feared by the Americans that was killed in action. Any acknowledgement of this would have had the potential to damage North Vietnamese and Viet Cong morale. Beyond the question of official documentation, some argue that cultural and political motives could also explain why Vietnamese records remain silent about an infamous female sniper. In post-war Vietnam, narratives about female fighters often highlighted revolutionary heroism and sacrifice. It's true that women played significant roles, both overt and covert, in the war. However, the story of a female fighter who engaged in torturous behavior might not align with the idealized depiction of female revolutionaries in official accounts. Hence, it's possible that even if a female sniper committed such acts, her story wouldn't be included in state-sanctioned narratives that emphasize moral righteousness and heroic conduct. Further, there's nothing in Hathcock's story that suggests that she was a particularly prolific sniper. Her reputation was because of the horrible acts she committed against prisoners of war. Again, the Vietnamese may not have wished to play up the role of such an individual in the post-war period, especially given attempts to normalize relations with America. There's also the perspective that Apache might have been a symbolic figure, or even an amalgamation of multiple female snipers. Some veterans have suggested that stories about Apache circulated as a means of personifying the fear and anger many Marines felt when confronted with a savage battlefield. War, with its countless rumors and secondhand stories, can inflate real events into powerful legends. It's not uncommon for a single, tangible enemy combatant to become a boogeyman figure, someone who encapsulates the worst fears and horrors of conflict. The psychological impact of facing an adversary reputed to be exceptionally cruel could have enhanced her legend over time. Meanwhile, those who served with Carlos Hathcock remained steadfast that Apache was, in fact, a real person. According to multiple eyewitness accounts, Hathcock became determined to take her out after witnessing the brutal torture she supposedly inflicted on captive Marines. In the well-known telling, he successfully eliminated her at a distance of over 700 yards, ending her reign of terror. Further, and importantly, his spotter verified the reality of the event itself, though couldn't directly verify who the woman was. While this anecdote relies heavily on personal testimonies, supporters say the consistency of these accounts lends credibility to the story. Still, from a strictly historical standpoint, anecdotal evidence alone can't serve as conclusive proof. Oral testimonies are subject to memory lapses, exaggerations, and the influence of retelling across decades. Further, Carlos Hathcock is in essence a mythic figure in his own right, and people like this have the tendency to have a reality-altering aura surrounding them. The mystery of Apache boils down to a clash between the fog of war and the rigid demands of historical proof. On one hand, the anecdotal evidence, especially from Carlos Hathcock and various Marine veterans, suggests she was a real fearsome female Viet Cong sniper. On the other, a lack of verifiable documentation raises legitimate doubts, and it's no secret that war stories can morph into legend over time. Given what we know, there's enough credibility in those first-hand accounts to keep her story alive. Whether Apache was one woman or an amalgamation of multiple female fighters, one thing's clear. The allure of her legend captures the raw and brutal nature of the Vietnam War. She might be more myth than fact, but that very uncertainty is what makes her tale endure, as it did when her specter haunted American servicemen like Carlos Hathcock. Emperor Nero, who reigned from 54 AD to 68 AD, is one of the most controversial figures in Roman history. In ancient sources, he's universally portrayed as an evil tyrant at worst, and a self-absorbed artist at best. One of the difficulties with examining Nero, as you'll see, is that all the primary sources which have survived are extremely biased against him. Whether this is an accurate reflection of his character or not has been heavily debated by modern scholars, who tend to view him more favorably than ancient writers. When examining Nero's demise, we're confronted with conflicting ancient reports and modern theories that vary on how and why he died. In order to understand the complex situation that led to Nero's demise, it's important to consider the political and familial background of his rise to power. Nero, born Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, was connected to the Julio-Claudian dynasty as the son of Agrippina the Younger, who was the sister of Emperor Caligula. After Emperor Claudius married Nero's mother Agrippina in 49, he adopted him, and he then became known as Nero Claudius Caesar Drusus Germanicus. Upon Claudius's death in 54 AD, Nero, only 16 or 17 at the time, ascended to the imperial throne. For the first few years of Nero's rule, governance was largely influenced by others. Particularly influential were his mother Agrippina, the philosopher-statesman Seneca the Younger, and the Praetorian prefect Sextus Afranius Burrus. Initially, Nero was praised for being a merciful and kind ruler. However, tensions arose between him and Agrippina, and suspicions surrounded Agrippina's potential involvement in Claudius's death. Over time, Nero distanced himself from his mother's counsel and potentially arranged for her slaying in 59 AD. By the mid-60s, Nero's popularity among the Roman aristocracy, and potentially even among the general Roman citizenry, began to wane. His extravagant building projects, such as the Domus Aurea, were financed by heavy taxes and contributed to dissatisfaction among the elite. Furthermore, Nero's personal obsession with artistic pursuits and public performances scandalized many who believed an emperor should maintain Roman dignity. Appearing on stage and competing in Greek-style games was viewed as a public disgrace. Simultaneously, dissent was brewing in the provinces, which had become increasingly influential as the Roman Empire grew and expanded. The infamous Great Fire of Rome in 64 led to rumors that Nero either started the fire himself or failed to suppress it in a timely manner. Though historians differ on the extent of Nero's involvement, the rumor that he, quote, fiddled while Rome burned persists in popular consciousness. In the aftermath, Nero's construction of a lavish palace on land cleared by the fire fanned the flames of discontent. By 65, the so-called Pisonian conspiracy sought to overthrow Nero and install Gaius Calpurnius Piso as emperor. Although the plot was uncovered and ruthlessly suppressed, paranoia grew around Nero's administration. His trust in the Senate and other elites further eroded. When further rebellions broke out in provinces like Gaul and Spain, Nero tried to quash them, but the tide was turning. But let's get down to the mystery here. How exactly did Nero die? Ancient sources generally agree on one key point. Nero died in June 68, at about 30 years old. However, interpretations of what precisely happened in his final hours vary among the three main ancient historians who wrote about him: Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio. Tacitus, in his Annals, depicts Nero as isolated and desperate. He writes that the Senate had declared him a public enemy, and that Nero feared torture and humiliation if captured. With the Praetorian Guard deserting him, Nero fled Rome for a villa outside the city. In a state of panic and learning that his enemies were closing in, he reportedly had his secretary, Epaphroditus, help him end himself. Notably, in this account, Tacitus humiliates Nero one last time by portraying him as too unmanly and dishonorable to carry out this grim task himself. In the Lives of the 12 Caesars, Suetonius largely corroborates Tacitus's version, but includes some dramatic details. For instance, according to this account, his primary concern about his own demise is the loss for the art world, not the impact upon the Roman people or the Roman state. Cassius Dio similarly recounts that Nero's last moments were self-absorbed. Like Suetonius, he notes that Nero's final words lamented the loss of his artistic legacy and what he could have accomplished had he lived. Although most traditional texts suggest that Nero did indeed die in 68 AD, there were rumors of his survival that developed into something of a mass hysteria, if ancient sources are believed. Some ancient writers mention a phenomenon known as the Nero redivivus, meaning Nero reborn, legend. It held that Nero wasn't really dead and would return to reclaim the throne. Three major false Neros emerged over the next 2 decades, garnering varying degrees of support before they were put down or exposed as fakes. The survival rumor, while popular in antiquity, is almost universally rejected by modern scholars. However, there's always the extremely slim possibility that Nero did manage to escape and live out his life quietly. Notably, early Christian communities believed that Nero was the Antichrist, which fueled belief that he would return with a vengeance. Modern historians generally accept the ancient testimony that Nero was responsible for his own demise, but they diverge on the precise motivations and surrounding factors. One debate concerns whether Nero's act was truly voluntary. Another modern perspective focuses on the chain of events leading up to his death. The revolts in Gaul, Spain, and Africa may have accelerated his downfall beyond the point of rescue. Some historians have questioned whether the Senate's declaration of Nero as a public enemy was enough legal impetus to push him towards finishing himself off rather than fighting. According to contemporary Roman law, once declared a public enemy, any citizen could be slain with impunity. Seizure of property and humiliating execution were standard punishments if the captured person was an emperor no longer protected by the throne. If Nero believed he'd face public execution, it's plausible he realized that he had to take matters into his own hands as a final means to control his destiny. Others have explored more conspiratorial angles, such as the possibility that Nero was slain by loyalists who sought to prevent a worse fate for him. Under this theory, Nero is essentially thought of as so incompetent that he couldn't read the writing on the wall, so his retainers had to take matters into their own hands. Upon Nero's death, chaos enveloped the empire. Galba, the governor of Hispania, now part of modern Spain, marched on Rome and assumed the title of emperor. But his reign was extremely short-lived. He was quickly overthrown by Otho, who was then replaced by Vitellius, and ultimately Vespasian took control in 69 AD, a year known as the Year of the Four Emperors. Can we draw a conclusion on what actually happened to Nero with absolute certainty? We'll never know the exact circumstances of Nero's final moments, because every ancient source was so deeply biased against him. Yet despite this bias, the most plausible explanation still remains that he chose to go out on his own. In the end, his demise is lost in the fog of rumor, propaganda, speculation, and Roman high drama. Perhaps this uncertainty is eminently fitting for a Roman emperor who would have rather had the life of an actor or musician than a statesman. High Brazil has captured imaginations for almost a millennium. Often described as a mythical or phantom island located west of Ireland, it's said to be cloaked in mist, except for one day every 7 years, when it becomes visible, yet still unreachable. The earliest known cartographic evidence of High Brazil appears on a Venetian map by Andrea Bianco in 1436, where a small island named Insula de Brasil is shown to the west of Ireland. Subsequent Renaissance-era maps generally included a similar island. In 1480, a group of sailors set off in search of the island, though there's no clear evidence from the time as to what they found. However, in 1497, a Spanish diplomat wrote that John Cabot and his crew had stopped over on the island and saw evidence that it had previously been discovered. By the 16th and 17th centuries, High Brazil became more frequently featured in sea charts, though its location varied from one map to another. In some accounts, the island was rumored to be a place of immense wealth and perfection, drawing parallels with other legendary realms like Atlantis. Many of the oldest narratives about High Brazil stem from Irish folklore, which include the idea of the island having an advanced or even magical civilization. Gerald of Wales, active during the 12th and 13th centuries, while not directly referencing High Brazil, wrote about strange islands off the coast of Ireland in his Topographia Hibernica. In 1684, Irish historian Roderick O'Flaherty described sightings of a mysterious island that occasionally appeared off the Irish coast. Despite its status as a phantom island, there have been purported eyewitness accounts even into the modern era. One of the most famous claims about High Brazil allegedly occurred in 1674 when a Captain John Nisbet reportedly came ashore on High Brazil. According to this often repeated story, the captain described encountering large black rabbits and a mysterious wizard living in a stone castle. Unfortunately, what many sources fail to state is that John Nisbet wasn't a real person, but a character from a novel intended to read as a historical travelogue. In modern times, some theorists speculate that High Brazil might be a misidentification of existing maritime features. For instance, the Porcupine Bank, a raised seabed region west of Ireland, occasionally has shallow waters that could, in theory, appear as an island in certain tidal conditions. During extreme low tides or under unusual atmospheric refraction effects, parts of the bank might become briefly visible, sparking sightings. This phenomenon, combined with the propensity for sailors to perpetuate maritime myths, might have kept the tradition of High Brazil alive. On the flip side, modern marine exploration has largely dispelled the notion of an uncharted island off the Irish coast. With advancements in satellite imaging, hydrographic surveys, and global mapping technologies, any significant landmass protruding above sea level would certainly have been documented. Detailed maps of the Atlantic seafloor around Ireland show no undiscovered islands within the region where High Brazil is typically placed. In a similar vein, any repeated sightings of High Brazil could be attributed to optical illusions, such as a fata morgana, a type of mirage that distorts distant objects or even the horizon line. In short, High Brazil is likely a classic example of a myth rooted in equal parts genuine maritime curiosity and good old-fashioned tall tales. The Porcupine Bank could have sparked initial sightings under rare tidal or atmospheric conditions. These were then blended with centuries-old Irish legends to create a timeless, phantom island. Chartmakers wove it into their maps, storytellers embellished it with riches and wizards, and sailors' yarns kept the lore alive for generations. But modern technology, satellite imaging, detailed hydrographic surveys show there's simply no hidden island off Ireland's coast. Zerzura is portrayed as a lost oasis city hidden amid the vast expanse of the Sahara Desert, captivating explorers and historians for centuries. It's said to be a city of white walls, guarded by black stone giants, and home to untold treasures. The earliest written references to Zerzura appear in medieval Arabic manuscripts. In these stories, Zerzura was depicted as a place where the houses were white, the gates were carved with mysterious symbols, and an abundance of water and date palms could be found. The manuscripts also mentioned a sleeping king and queen, and hint that the city might hide valuable relics or artifacts. However, these early references often clearly contain heavily legendary material, leaving us to wonder how much truth lies in the accounts. During the 1920s and 1930s, interest in Zerzura skyrocketed when European explorers roamed the desert in search of the legendary city. Major Ralph Bagnold, who led expeditions in the Egyptian and Libyan deserts, helped establish the Zerzura Club with fellow adventurers who were obsessed with uncovering the oasis. Armed with camels and early vehicles, these explorers scoured remote corners of the Sahara, braving harsh winds and unforgiving temperatures. Many reported finding signs of ancient rivers, dried lake beds, and rock art, but none returned with definitive proof of Zerzura itself. One theory suggests that the legend of Zerzura may stem from real-life desert oases that were once thriving, but later lost to shifting sands and changing climates. For instance, some point to the presence of the Kufra Oasis in Libya, which could have fueled stories of a hidden paradise among the dunes. Others have speculated that the city might be a confusion of multiple remote oases, which medieval traders and explorers encountered, creating a kind of patchwork tale. Furthermore, geological changes over centuries might have buried once lush valleys, adding to the allure of a fabled lost city. Critics of the Zerzura legend assert that the city's repeated mention in tales of lost treasure and supernatural guardians reveals more about human imagination than ancient history. They argue that explorers' fascination with discovering the unknown likely fueled exaggerations and tall tales over the years. For them, Zerzura symbolizes our innate desire to believe in hidden wonders just out of reach. Indeed, many lost city legends, like El Dorado in South America or the Seven Cities of Gold in North America, have proven to be more mythological than real. Still, the Sahara is enormous, and there's a chance that traces of once thriving communities have yet to be uncovered.